amended somewhat to include a little bit more about the responsibility for the town and the homeowner with respect to the new grinder pump status, where it's now the responsibility of the town to take care of grinder pumps. You know, were the bylaws changed last year, Paul, to?
A year ago.
A year ago, and they put the listing in there. And I'm wondering if we should put some other things in there, because, you know, we ran into some situations, I think, during the first phase of the grinder pumps that might have been more than we had anticipated. Is that right, Mike? Yeah. So do you think that we should specifically recognize that? Because that was probably the reason why the amount was overrun during that period. Was it not?
Partly, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in your opinion, what do you think were the determining factors which caused the numbers to increase?
I think we didn't know what was out there initially until the inspections were done. And one of the conditions when we found a condition that was what we call critical, and we've talked about what critical means, we felt that we had the obligation, based on how the bylaw was written, that the town was obligated to do the repair in an expedient manner. And basically, that added some cost to it up front. In the long run, as we talked about previously, it probably saved money because a catastrophic failure was averted by taking care of a minor problem before it went catastrophic. So, you know, those repairs added up a little bit. There was also some additional repairs based on gray areas in the language. And I think there's a couple of words that may need to be looked at, and I know probably the person that do that would be the town attorney. And no, that's primarily what it was. I mean, we changed out not that many cores, but
Right.
You know, cores are not cheap. And there were a couple of instances where we found repairs that ran a lot more than what a normal E1 repair would cost because of the type of installation. And that beefed up the price a little bit. So a little bit here and a little bit there basically caused a pretty major, overrun.
In your opinion, is there anything we can do to somewhat control the costs for the next year, so that we don't run into a situation again where we're over by $1.50 or something every year?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be $1.50 every year. I think, we saw what's out there, and I feel that there's an obligation to bring them up to the condition that they were when they were installed, basically, in what we call the town standard. I think that would be done over the first 2 years, or that was what was proposed. And the third and fourth years were, the remote alarm systems, which I think Dave was addressing in the handout he gave about, what is the town standard? If they were not given one of these alarm systems, should the town be responsible for providing it? That all has to be defined. How far do we go?
Was the language, the town standard, included in the statement of work in the contract to Weston and Sampson?
The language was used and it was defined in the contract,
Okay, all right,
or in the RFP.
okay, all right.
Actually, in page 4.2 of the contract and page 4.3, it does mention town
Town
standard.
standard, okay.
In the contract.
Okay.
It doesn't define it completely, but it does mention it.
Was it defined in the RFP, or?
Yeah, it was defined in the RFP. Basically, it was units installed according to the manufacturer's recommendations,
Okay.
and all equipment that came with it needed to be repaired. So that included the alarm systems and whatever else was involved, the control panels. So,
Okay, all right. But the town standard, is the town standard included in the bylaws? I don't believe so.
no, not in the
Well, we
bylaws.
probably should put some language in the bylaws to reference the town standard.
Yeah, and
Since that's a critical part of the whole process.
yeah, and I think that needs to be defined in the sewer use regulations,
Oh,
probably
yeah.
under
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly what what's involved? I mean, do we upgrade everything to the same point, or do we just repair what's out there?
Getting to the sewer use regulations, I mean, from what I've read, and I read it rather quickly this afternoon, there is no mention of the word, or the words grinder pumps, number one. So I think it needs a new section that addresses the grinder pumps. And of course, the grinder pumps at that time were the responsibility of the homeowner and not the town. So I think we have to incorporate that language in there as well. And I think that there's got to be some other changes in there that reflects that the town, that the DPW or the sewer department in the town is now responsible and not the sewer commission who initially wrote those regulations back, I guess it was in 2002 or something, I believe, when they originally, or maybe earlier than that, I don't know. I think they were first amended in 2002. They were
Yeah,
probably written-
89 was, I believe,
Oh, really?
the oldest one I have, and then they were
They were amended.
amended
they were
almost on a
amended
yearly
every time.
basis
So I think
until.
that there's, obviously, there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah.
And I think that eventually maybe those regulations should also be referenced in the bylaws, which I don't believe they are now. So I think that would make it a clearer picture for everybody concerned, so. Now, are the regulations, are they online? Can they be found online someplace, or is it a deep dark search to find them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe they were online.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
they're available at the DPW building, and it's primarily for contractors and industrial, commercial users that have to abide by the
Right.
various regulations in there.
But I,
Mike, or Tom, I have a question. In terms of where things should be, I'm a little confused if things should be in a bylaw, or if they should be in the sewer regulations, or if they should be in both areas, and what the criteria is for including it in a bylaw or just a regulation.
Yeah, I think it probably should be in both, whereas the bylaw,
why don't we ask the town council?
I'd be happy to answer that through you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jeffrey Blake, and I'm here from Copeland and Page Town Council. With respect to the bylaw, you can't just change a bylaw without having it adopted at town meeting.
Oh, yes, town
So
meeting.
that's a little bit more
I
difficult.
understand that, yes.
But the sewer use regulations, we can certainly alleviate or at least address and clarify a lot of the concerns that you have here through a sewer use regulation, provided, of course, that we don't contradict the bylaw. But for example, you're talking about a town standard. We could certainly, in a sewer use regulation, we could outline what a grinder pump needs to have. We could most likely outline, I don't know if this is how you do it, but maybe even certain manufacturers, certain capacities, those kind of issues that appear to be the gray areas that we're talking about, those can certainly be teased out and clarified in a sewer use regulation. It's much easier to do because you don't have to go back to town meeting.
Right.
It's a meeting of the DPW, or I guess the sewer commissioner is a DPW. So to answer your question, you can do both. But with what I'm hearing tonight, most of the stuff that I'm hearing tonight is really a clarification and not a contradiction to the bylaw. So you may not really need to have the bylaw changed,
So
but just
based on what you
clarify.
heard so far, your recommendation would be to not change the bylaw, but to deal with it through the sewer regulations.
What I have heard so far,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Well, what you're talking about is the code, really. We have bylaws and then we have code. Code regulation.
Yeah, the Code of Regulations is essentially your general bylaws. So what I am talking about is, when I talk about the bylaw, I'm talking about the code,
Yeah.
Chapter 132 sewage disposal.
Yep,
And when
I
I
have
talk
a copy
about,
right here.
yeah, and that's a bylaw that requires adoption at town meeting. And when I'm talking about a sewer use regulation, I don't know if you have a copy of that. I do know one was
Yeah,
circulated
yeah,
earlier.
Yeah, we do have a
We
copy.
Okay,
do.
that's what I'm talking about as the sewer use regulations. Those are the ones that are, and oftentimes this is the case that you'll find in town. You'll have a very broad document, the bylaw, and then the sewer use or whatever other regulations, Board of Health regulations, et cetera, are much more comprehensive and in-depth, that really just kind of put the meat on the bone. This is just the bone, and the regulations are putting the meat on the bone and getting down to the nitty-gritty.
Is it not usual to reference the sewer procedures in the bylaw? Is that an unusual situation?
I can't say that it's unusual. I've seen it done both
It
ways.
would seem to me, I mean, some people may not even know that the sewer procedures exist. I mean, like Mike said earlier, the contractors do because they have to abide by that, and that's particularly what they go by. But since now the sewer regulations include, this grinder pump, which, was in the homes of 550 so people, I think that it might be wise to reference the procedures in the bylaws so that they know they're there. And I think that the procedures, when they're finally amended, should go up online so that they're available if somebody wants to take the time to read them.
I mean, sure, I don't think that it would hurt, but again, if you're going to amend the bylaw, even such as an amendment to say,
I understand.
pursuant to X,
We fully
yes.
understand that it's not within our power to do that, but we can make a recommendation
Oh, absolutely.
to the town meeting that they address that particular change in the bylaws. And we're not looking at something that's going to be a comprehensive change. We just want to try to cover all the bases so that there's no future gray areas with respect to the bylaws and the responsibilities for both the homeowner and the town. That's what we're trying to do.
Sure.
So if you make even one, like, just for example, if you make a one-word change,
Yep.
that still has to go in front of the
It
town.
does.
Yep, it does, yep.
It does. If it was a spelling mistake,
No, that's-
well, some take the position that it would even with a spelling mistake, but I'd have to look at the town meeting warrant article that adopted the bylaw. But those are the kind of things that, that's a gray area with respect to that. But if you're making any type of substantive change, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Dave, the information that you passed out tonight about some thoughts you want to address that particular?
Oh, okay, yeah, that was one of the agenda items, so I put something down on paper so that I could collect my thoughts. This was regarding the topic of town standard for grinder pumps and also homeowner responsibility for grinder pumps. And so my thought on that was, and I have been talking with a lot of the homeowners to try to gather their inputs on this, and some of them are here tonight to talk, so they can give you kind of a personal account of this. This is a little bit my own collection of my own thoughts and other homeowners, but basically it's the idea that the sewer commission, by putting together the various grinder pump packages that they used in each of the different sewer phases, essentially defined a town standard for that phase of sewer construction for the grinder pump station. They put a lot of thought into that. They, for example, were the ones that came up with the idea that it should have the generator transfer switch, which needed to be a custom design in order to implement, and also the battery backup. We've heard about that. And so in the various phases, they gave consideration to what that pump station should look like. So my thought was that if we were to adopt a new grinder town standard, a pump station town standard, that it should be looking forward rather than backwards, which is to say, if there was a grinder pump station that was done in a particular phase of the sewer construction, but it's, let's say, fully operational according to the way it was designed to operate, that there shouldn't be a need to essentially modify or replace that grinder pump station for the purpose of what I'd say standardization, simply because I don't feel as though there's any deficiency in its construction or design. And it goes a little bit along the lines of, well, number one, to reduce the cost to the program, simply because replacing a lot of things will be very expensive. But also a little bit along the lines, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Because every time you go in and replace something, there's going to be a certain number of errors that simply result from the activity of having the workman on site to do something there. Nothing ever, you don't get 100% hit rate on something like that. Whereas when something is, needs to be repaired, then there's no issue because it needs to be repaired. So you have to basically have someone there to repair it. So that was my first, that was my thought on the town standard. I don't have any particular issue with the proposed town standard that appeared in the RFP, for example, moving forward. I would say that, it's perfectly fine. I would simply defer to the DPW and the sewer superintendent in terms of what the town standard should be. But in talking with a lot of homeowners, they're perfectly happy with what they have, assuming that it's functional, and they're not really particularly looking for, a new and different station. They just want the station they have. To be honest with you, they don't, want to give a lot of thought to their pump station. They just want it to work, basically. It doesn't have to be shiny or that sort of thing. It's not something they want to prominently display about how nice it is or what have you. And so that's, they just want, it's kind of keep it simple is what, one of the homeowners has said. Just, and then on the homeowner responsibility, I have a few thoughts on that. There are a couple that perhaps have come up before. There's providing access to the control panel. In some cases, those control panels may be in places where they are difficult to access, and that could be an issue. To keep on the E1, on the outdoor E1 units, the covers need to be properly vented. And we've heard stories about how in some cases it's been buried, and that needs to be corrected. And that's the homeowner's responsibility, according to this list, which I think is very reasonable. To provide the proper grading around the outdoor E1 covers, because if there is an overflow at the pump cover, you want all of that water to flow away from the pump cover, and that requires some landscaping, basically. And that's another very common mistake. Landscapers, when they come to a house with a grinder pump station, they believe the homeowner wants it to be completely obscured, so they will put mulch around it and over it, and the landscapers don't particularly know any of this stuff. They do it according to their aesthetics. They want it to look nice, and that normally means that it's not functioning very well because it's not graded away from it. When you grade it away from it, it becomes prominent. That's basically the idea, but that's the way it should be. Another one, number 4 here, is to limit water use during a pump breakdown or a power disruption. In my opinion, this is entirely the responsibility of the homeowner. Only the homeowner is the person that can take responsibility for not having a backup during a case when the pump is broken or when there's a power disruption. And so up to this point, the information they've been provided is not terribly useful because the information, for example, that's circulated by E1 in a pamphlet like this tries to absolutely minimize the idea that anything like that would ever happen. So it will say, for example, in the case of a power outage, simply limit water use. But it doesn't specifically say that in your tank, it's going to have a certain capacity, and you have to not limit your water use, but you need to keep it to within 38 gallons unless you have a generator. So, specific, useful, actionable information is what the homeowner needs in this regard. And I think with this information, they can be held completely accountable for that on their own. And in many cases, we found out, for example, that the remote sentries, the majority of them were actually miswired so that during a power outage, they would not alarm, but the homeowner had a false sense of security that they were being protected and that alarm would go off. That alarm never did go off, and there were a number of backups which were because they were not relying on their own responsibility to limit their water usage according to the number of gallons, but they were relying on this thing to go off, which it didn't, and that was essentially an over-reliance on that. So the individual families will vary tremendously on this account because some of them have finished basements and they're very sensitive. Some of them, as I said before, have nothing in the basement. Some of them have had a previous backup. They'll be very sensitive to the issue. So what an individual family will do will vary a lot, and I think there should be room for flexibility along those lines. But ultimately, they are responsible. And the other one is the one that's already written into the bylaw, so this is probably not absolutely necessary here, but it's to follow the proper disposal rules in order to prevent abuse to the pump. So that's just for completeness, and those are just my thoughts on that.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
The first one pertains to your earlier statement.
Yeah.
With respect to the different configurations of the pumps that were installed over the period of time when they were being installed around the town. Obviously, the newer homes and the newer construction and the latest phase has the latest configuration. Now, if that configuration has something that would be desirable for somebody that got one of the earlier pumps, might they come to the town and request that be installed as well? What is your opinion on that, Mike?
I think as I've stated before, pretty much what the Sewer Commission had spec'd out in various contracts were pretty much what the final system is. It's just different equipment, because equipment was created over time and
What about
models.
like generator hookups or
They were
battery-
provided for every single pump,
Everyone
every
from
one
di-
that the
from
town
day one?
supplied, yeah.
in the
In
battery?
addition with the battery backup for the alarms
So
was
they're all-
provided.
they're all
In
the
different forms, but that was,
So there may be a later configuration, but all of those essentials were in there, so there's no difference really.
and, you know, to answer to Dave, I mean, one of the things that was part of the RFP was if they did find a wiring issue with the alarm, to correct it then and there. And that was, you know, that was done on whatever that, you know, they found, Weston Sampson found when they were out there, so.
Okay, well, I think that, you know, what we have to do here is, I think that we should take a couple of votes here. First of all, do we agree that we should make some recommended changes to the bylaws to be ready for town meeting in November? To at least include references to some of the things we're discussing now. I mean, there may not be a huge change, but at least the sewer procedures should be referenced in the bylaws. I feel they should be anyways, at least at a minimum. And there may be something else as well, but I think we have to take that responsibility to put together something that we can draft up as a warrant article that go before the Board of Selectmen, of course, for their approval, and then possibly, submit it to town meeting if that's their choice to do so.
So you're just saying something that would say,
Just a general
refer
statement,
to sewer regulations?
Exactly right, yes.
Which,
Yeah,
which that would be something that I think would be non-controversial and.
Yeah, well,
No one should have an issue
we're trying to
with
be
that.
as non-controversial as possible, yeah, that's,
Yeah.
and we're trying not to rewrite something because
Yeah.
that just creates problems. So that's what I'm trying to do. So can I hear a motion to amend the bylaws to at least include the sewer regulations as amended?
So moved. I make the motion.
A motion to recommend?
Motion to recommend that we do modify the town bylaws to include reference to the sewer procedures.
Right. That's it, Joyce.
And how are we going to do that?
We're gonna do that because we're gonna write up a recommended article in the town warrant to change the bylaws to include that, and we'll put it, in its proper place in the town bylaws.
Okay, so you just
Under
want,
section 132.
you just want,
It's kind of an omnibus statement that, we may put something else, but at least,
You're saying as part of our mission statement that
Right.
you want a motion to agree that we're
Yeah.
going to do something with the bylaws.
exactly, that's what,
Okay.
yeah, right,
okay.
okay. So I have a motion to
Mr.
that
Cohen
effect?
would call that a placeholder.
Placeholder, okay, it's a placeholder, all right.
Okay.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we make the amendment that you just dictated to Joyce.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. And I think that Mike has the responsibility, I guess, to do the regulation now. Do you have any help with that? Do you need legal counsel to do that as well, or is that just a tedious task that must be done?
It's a tedious task, but I'd like to say that I don't do it myself. It's a group of people are involved. Basically, we take into account what's typically done in other communities
Okay,
and fine-tune it and adjust it for our community. And so it's a collaborative effort between, it could be legal,
okay.
DPW director, myself, and
Do you think it's reasonable to assume that could be finished by town meeting in the fall?
I know the whole rules and regs are scheduled to be overhauled, and that's usually a very time-consuming project. I know the grinder part of it could probably be defined before the fall town meeting, but I'm not sure all the rules and regs can be defined, because I know there's a study that's proposed to be done and
Okay,
a few other things that would be time-consuming. A couple of thoughts on the bylaw changes and what I have an issue with, and I'm sure the town attorney can clarify or add to it. One of the gray areas is defining appurtenances. And I think that can be referenced to the sewer use regulations to define, but I think that needs to be limited. Also, right now, it's, according to my interpretation of the bylaw, that it is made part of the town sewer system. So that makes it fall into a certain category, and I'd like a little clarification on that, whether we need to change that language or not.
Which language is that? Which paragraph is that? Is that in the bylaw? Is that section 132?
It's in 132,
Dash 3?
Dash 3 is grinder pumps.
Yeah, it says both existing and new residential grinder pumps and the associated appurtenances. So if you look up the definition of appurtenances, it's pretty wide.
What is an appurtenance? I'm not familiar with that word.
It's anything associated with the grinder pump. And the other language is, the word maintained. The word maintained in itself has a connotation that something is to be looked at, to be serviced on a timely or on a regular basis. And as we know, E1 said, these units don't need maintenance. And by adding that in there, I mean, there could be liability-based if the town only responds to emergency calls and, if we're aware of something or we don't, we look at the units in a periodic, once a year, once every 3 years or whatever, so.
Perhaps town council could look at that and find out if that word has any far-reaching implications. If we
Yeah,
use another word that isn't so limiting.
I would just eliminate maintain because you have replace or repair or replace in there.
Serviced and replaced.
Yeah, service or replaced.
Yeah.
And then the other one is an integral component of the town's wastewater system, collection system, which is the other language that may need a little defining.
Isn't it an integral component of the town's wastewater? Is it not an integral part?
It's part of it.
It's got to be an integral part because it's connected to.
Anyway,
It says it's to be serviced and replaced by the town as an integral component of the town's wastewater collection system. So that's making it part of the collection system, and as I mentioned
wasn't it
before,
anyway?
it falls under the rules and regs that we have to abide by for the rest of the collection system.
Yeah.
So that expands the
Homeowner's responsibility
requirements of what we need,
to do.
may be liable to do, yeah. So it's just something that,
Just give me an example of what that might be.
our regulations require, and why we proceeded with the repairs and the price, and the cost estimates as I did, is we found out there's a problem in so many units. And for my systems, for the rest of the collection system, it has to be, it has to be addressed. You just can't say, wait till it fails and then we'll fix it. That's
No, I understand.
not acceptable anyplace. So when we find something, we're aware of something, it has to be taken care of. It has to be, basically operational and reliable. So that's what we do with our equipment. And my gray area is if we're responsible to do that with the whole, with all the 550 units, 537 units, that enlarges the scope of what we have to do.
But doesn't it seem that we are?
Well,
I
I
mean,
would
I
say
don't,
this.
it doesn't exclude it, I mean.
Well, we just discussed how
Yeah.
changing the bylaw so it would not include periodic maintenance. And that's something that, in the town's equipment, if they owned it, they would absolutely periodically go by just to check in on everything. But for this plan, we're not talking about having someone from the town go by and check in on grinder pumps. We're talking
No.
about them to repair upon failure,
Right.
essentially. In other words,
Exactly
when the
right.
alarm goes off, basically, or unless there's a condition that the homeowner is knowledgeable enough to know that, there is something going on.
Well, if we take the word
But that's
maintain
not
out,
what Mike's saying.
Mike is saying something that
Yeah, I
that he
mean-
feels it's not an integral part of the system.
Yeah, as far as our system goes, we do an inspection at least 3 times a week. And we'll open it up, take a look at the wet well, take a look at the equipment.
Yeah, but you're talking about your
Right.
your pump station.
But that's a standard that we perform for all of our equipment. So if we see a little bit of grease in there, we go ahead and clean it and take care of it. we don't wait for it to build up to the point where it's going to cause a failure. So, there's, to me, the language is a little bothersome. It encompasses a very big area, and I think it exposes the town to some level of extra liability that it
Well,
shouldn't.
take a hypothetical situation. Say somebody has had a grinder pump, installed in their house for 10 years, and they've never had a problem. Okay? And they've had one inspection, which is the inspection that took place this year, and when the inspection took place, they didn't find anything that was really abnormal. Okay, so you go away. Is there any plan in the future to have a periodic maintenance check on the grinder pumps in town? I mean, you don't do it every 3 weeks or every 3 years, but I mean, I think it would be wise to do that, because that would lessen the possibility of a catastrophic failure.
Yeah, I mean, at what cost? You look at it as a cost-benefit.
Yeah, cost-benefit analysis, right?
And the issue is not all the pumps work the same, are serving the
Don't
same
have-
amount
don't
of
have-
people.
Exactly, right.
So you can't say we'll inspect them all every 3 years,
No.
because some may need it in 1 year or 6 months, others may need it in 10 years. So applying that to everybody is not,
But
it's not cost
do we
effective.
have that data available as to, what the number of users are in the home? I mean, that would obviously contribute to the,
I think, that'd be, we could probably get it, but it would be changing if every time the property changed, or if an in-law came and lived in there, or whatever. It'd be almost impossible to keep that up to date.
I'm just wondering how we could change this to, I understand what you're saying, but I think that we have to also look at it from the standpoint of, if we're taking responsibility, there's gotta be something we have to do, on a long-term basis to reduce the cost of catastrophic failures and make sure that the system is running.
Yeah, that basically was part of years 3 and 4 about possibly putting a monitoring system in where we'd be able to monitor, like with our pump stations, the performance, and would see some degradation at certain units, then we could go out there to that specific unit.
What would that installation of that monitoring system cost?
I don't have the exact numbers, but based on what I've seen, it would probably be similar or less than providing the remote sentry alarms to everybody. So I think initially, with everything, it would be in the $200,000 range for the whole town for putting the various
And that would
equipment
be
in.
something that wouldn't have to be done over the period of 1 year, be done over the period of maybe 2 or 3 years.
Again, it's a cost-benefit analysis
To
because,
spread the cost out, you could,
yeah.
yeah.
I would do it all at once because.
Is it mostly labor, or is it material? What's the?
Material.
So it's mostly material. Okay, so you're talking about $150,000 for material and $50,000 for labor, maybe? 3 to 1?
Yeah. And then, you're monitoring it, so that's another issue that needs to be
So
addressed.
then you gotta have a monitor person.
Not necessarily. You could have a notification system that when something falls outside of certain parameters that, you get a call or you get a notification that, hey, because we're not talking about failure, we're talking about,
Maintenance.
yeah, basically maintenance.
But I think that's the question I'd have is, if we were maintaining a fleet of vehicles,
Right.
the goal would be to have the vehicles operational.
Right.
And therefore, if you had that fleet schedule to say, hey, at 130,000 miles, we're going to replace the starter of any vehicle, whether it failed or not.
Yep.
And I guess that's the question with the grinder pumps. Whether it's based on the age or what have you, should we be doing preventive efforts? Or are we basically saying to the residents who have grinder pumps, well, we'll respond when it fails, and therefore you're going to endure the inconvenience, and the town endures the cost of a failure? And I think,
I agree with you.
And I think my understanding is when we sort of had this responsibility, we were supposed to basically run it like any other utility, where you don't expect that your water's not going to operate, or that your electricity's not going to be running at some point, or your
sewer's not gonna
telephone, or what have you. That basically they're taking preventive actions so that those failures don't occur. And I think to me, that's the fundamental question of what
That's-
we're supposed to be doing.
That was my understanding as well. I thought that was what we're supposed to do. So I think that it's incumbent upon us to make sure that this particular utility, as you say, is functional. And I think that we can't expect the homeowner to be responsible, because some homeowners haven't got a clue, first of all, where it is or anything else. I mean, you're making a lot of assumptions there. So I think you're right. I mean, I'm not trying to, cost the town more money. I think we're trying to do it in such a way that we relieve ourselves of some, potential serious liability, which I think could be the case if we didn't do it in that particular manner. So it would be best to do it early than to pay the price later.
It's been my, I guess, opinion, since we started this year and a half ago, that we were supposed to be coming up with a solution for the homeowners when they had a failure. Now, I don't have a problem with preventive maintenance. I'm enough of an engineer to understand it. But this is not a $500,000 pumping station. And I'm not sure I like your words, pump station, for this application. I mean, this goes back to, is this an appliance? And some circles will say, yes, it is. And in that regard, the way it's been rolled out is if we have a problem, or we think we're gonna have a problem in 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever, then we fix the problem today, and I guess I don't have a problem with that, except if it snowballs, you're fixing everybody's, and you may be fixing them much too soon. If you have a problem with a dishwasher in your house, and if you have a bearing that's screaming, the bearing could last 10 years screaming, but it's not under the circumstances that these pumps are. So if you hear a bearing scream, you want to do something about it, and I agree with that. But if you look at somebody's mean time before failure documentation, and you say, well, Bob's had a pump for 15 years. Oh, it's beyond its expected life. Let's go change it. His pump may last another 15 years. So I'm concerned about we've gone too far in how we're addressing these issues.
See, I'd heard
And that's the $2 million.
right, but I'd heard it the other
Elephant.
way. During the debate a year and a half ago and so forth, we heard the words fairness, that they didn't want to be any different than any other sewer customer who would have a gravity feed. And therefore, if that's the case, then we don't subject those other peoples to, the risk of failure, meaning that we do preventive maintenance, and therefore they're not subject to any noises or other issues or what have you, that they're basically to be treated as if they did not have a grinder pump. And so that's why I interpreted it as, no, we're supposed to be proactive, and we're supposed to prevent failures, and we're supposed to be the case that if somebody is not burdened, quote unquote, by having a grinder pump. That's how I understood the debate a year and a half ago. What you're describing is a different standard. And I think that's where the disconnect is.
And
I agree
I
with you.
think we ought to be somewhere in the middle.
But I don't know how, I don't know if there is a middle.
I think that's been addressed. I mean, I tried to address that during the RFP. And, there's one thing if there's a bearing making noise, and there's another thing if that dishwasher is just shaking and moving its way across the floor.
Exactly.
And that's what we looked at with the grinder pumps. If they're making noise, they're not in the critical category.
Well, they shouldn't be.
Right, but if the ground is vibrating, these guys are good enough to be standing next to a unit, and you can tell if it's vibrating. And they pull it out, and they inspect it, and they can see it's a serious bearing noise, which means imminent failure. And those, if you do a cost analysis on it, compared to a catastrophic failure, it's very cost-effective to have those replaced. Now, the other ones that are just making noise, those are in the 1 year plus category. It's something to keep an eye on, but not necessarily that we have to take care of right away. So, yeah, we
Yellow
do,
flag on that one,
yeah, we do, look. You flag it, right.
whatever.
We do look at those.
No, I don't disagree with you, Paul, that we should be treating these people like they don't have a grinder pump. I don't disagree with that at all.
Right.
Thank God I don't have one, from what I've learned in all of this. But nobody comes out and checks my, and I don't expect them to, checks my gravity feed line. Because if I have a problem with it for whatever reason, I own it. I understand that. So, I go back to what I said. I believe you're correct in that's something I have learned over the past year and a half is we really need to treat these people like they don't have, and don't be offended by these people.
No, but, right, the grinder pump owners.
But the owners need to
You're
be,
one of us now, Dan.
need to be treated like those of us that were fortunate not to have one. So I will yield to your
Right.
position.
So I think we probably agree that was the original intention. Does anybody else have anything to say about that?
Mission statement.
Yeah?
Is this part of the mission statement
Yes.
discussion?
This
Okay.
is what we're talking about, right?
This is pretty much all the missions.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
I concur, but note that, and I want to go back to Mike's point, it's not easy to figure out. It's not a simple time thing. It's not 3 years we should go back. In some places, we should go back once a year, in other places, once every 5. And it's not simple to do, but it might, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but your point was, is there are ways to fix that? Am I correct? In other words, to know that for his house, we got to go back every 3 years, and for Dave's, it's every 5 or whatever.
I mean, look at it now. We don't have a history that we can go back on and do some kind of projection.
Not yet.
Not yet. And it may be 20 years before we can get to that point. So what do we do in the meantime? In the meantime, and my recommendation was that we look at the remote monitoring system, that we actually can see what's going on out there in a much better level. We can't rely on the residents. Not all of them are as diligent as Dave to look at his equipment or change the batteries. So,
Isn't there
you know.
a database being accumulated now with this, with Weston and Sampson? I thought they were accumulating a database.
Yeah, it's-
Now, what is that database? Is there anything on there to indicate, any potential problems they might see coming in the future, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what their report was based on, was what their inspections found, and we categorized those
Okay.
repairs. So
All right.
yes, it was done.
So that database could be something to use
Right, I
right
mean-
now, before we get to the point where we're putting in the monitoring devices, 2 or 3 years hence. And I think that's it's probably something we can use right now, and, because like you say, there may be something you may want to go back every year and check.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain ones that have constant problems, and you've heard of some of the residents say that, my unit's gone down 3 times. Well, that's something that we get, we flag, we look at it, find out what's causing this. Is it operator error? Is it equipment? Is it bad installation? I mean, that's something that I feel obligated that we must do in order to solve it. We don't want people, losing their grinder system every couple of years or every year. It shouldn't happen, and there's a reason why it does, and we have to find out what it is.
Have there been any cases where it's been found that the grade that was used was incorrect?
Yeah,
Was
quite
not
a-
steep enough,
Yeah, quite a few.
and they had to be replaced? Replace the pipe, is that right?
No,
No, there weren't.
no. The grade primarily is where, in association with the top of the unit.
Okay, so coming from the house into the unit, in other words?
That's a set depth on the unit. So is the unit covered, buried properly?
Okay, all right.
Has it settled over time, which it does?
What I'm talking about is the pipe, from the unit to the pipe to the street. Now,
Yeah.
there's a certain
I mean, going in,
grade, yes. right.
going into the can,
Yeah,
yes, at the can, there is a certain grade that's constant. Coming out of the house, they vary.
very-
Yeah, and you can't do anything about it. Some people have slabs, some people, have cellars, and it just varies greatly.
Right.
So,
okay, all right, thank you. Okay,
I guess I wanted to do this on the cheap, and we're not going to be able to. I think that's where I have come to realize.
Yeah, I think that statement is correct.
The difficulty, Dan, to be honest, people don't call the DPW or my office when their systems are working, but you ought to hear how they call when they
Oh,
don't work.
yes, I can imagine. I understand.
And it's really, and seriously, it really is an inconvenience to folks who've suffered a backup, whether it's gravity or grinder pump. And trust me, we just had one this past week. They don't want to experience it again. And I think that's why if anything, we're basically trying to give a standard that you would expect from your water utility, or any other utility. You expect that this thing is going to be operational, and if it isn't, it's an exception that these people want to understand why and what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's really what
I have a continuing effect of dirty water.
Right.
Dirty water in a sense that it goes brown. Because I'm at the end of a pipeline.
Right,
And 2 weeks ago, it took them 20 minutes to fix it.
right.
But the way they fixed it was about 5 years ago, they had to put in another fire hydrant. Because I can't drain
Exactly.
the stuff out of my house
Dead end, right.
from my own spigot.
Right.
But they open the hydrant and bingo, it's over.
Right. But you don't want the discolored clothing
But-
and all that other problems that come with
But
this.
it keeps peace in the family.
Okay, with respect to the town liability and backups that occur, what's the position that the town is going to take, and what's the position that our legal counsel believes that we have to take with respect to this undertaking that we have right now?
Again, through you, Mr. Chairman, my name is Jeffrey Blake from Copeland and Page Town Council. And, with respect to the town's liability, that typically, in every case, is very fact-specific and fact-driven. If the town is negligent in its maintenance or its repair of, as the bylaw indicates, of these grinder pumps, then there may, provided that a court provided the town doesn't act reasonably or hasn't acted reasonable, there may be liability. But again, that's going to be it's difficult for me to sit here and tell you that every backup is going to be town liability. There's just so many factors. But the bottom line is that the town has to act reasonable. And having alarm systems, having monitoring systems, having those kind of safeguards in place, I think goes a long way toward making the town meet that reasonableness standard.
But if the homeowner has been judged to be responsible for the backup, then obviously they're responsible for the cleanup. And that would have to be determined by, I don't know, is that going to be done by Weston and Sampson, or,
Well,
or is it going to be done by the town, or is it, who's going to make that?
Town will do an investigation, whether it's gravity or grinder pump. We do such investigations.
Investigations, okay.
The difficulty is when knowing versus proving. I mean, there have been many instances where we suspect real strongly that the cause was by a homeowner error or homeowner irresponsibility.
Right.
But it's another thing to get that case to stick and be proven. And again, that's independent of grinder pumps. It's with sewer, and that's the challenge.
Since this has been instituted, have there been any situations where there have been backups and liability has been judged to be
Sure.
to the town or to the homeowner?
Yeah, we can have Mike speak to that, and he can he'll give you an idea of how many we've proven and how many we suspected, but we couldn't prove.
Yeah, I mean, this is a gray area, and when I look at it, I get the data from Weston Sampson. I may talk to the homeowner. I'll talk to the contractor who's doing the work. And from there, I have to make a judgment call, what actually happened, what's reasonable. And then, based on that, have to talk to the homeowner and either say the town's not covering it, or, if it happened on town property, obviously, it's the town's responsibility. With the grinder pumps, one of the issues was what if somebody does not stop using water or reduces their water? What if they don't call for repair in time and they flood their basement or their finished basement? How do you prove that? You really can't. You can get a good sense of it. And one of the issues that I dealt with was we had times from Weston and Sampson where their technicians were called to when they arrived. And, the backup should not have happened in that time frame. So, when it comes to me, I look at that and I'm saying, I'm sorry, you didn't stop using water or you didn't call when the alarm went off. Now, take it one step further. What about the alarm? This particular one happened to have been inspected recently, so we knew everything was operational. We knew the alarms were operational, the audible and the visual. So I had that data to help me say that, this was fully functional. So it wasn't it couldn't be our responsibility in any way. So that's where that case went. And you know, I'd have to say that between gravity and grinder units, there's been more than a handful here in the recent past.
Really? And what percentage have gone the town's way and what percentage have gone the homeowner's way? 50?
I think once it comes out of my hands, I write a report, and then it goes to the town manager's office, and then it's handled by the insurance company or from there. So I'll either give a yay or nay, and then it's up to, you know, it goes from there. I usually don't hear about what happens afterward until I ask. Oh.
Can you share with us, Paul, what the...
It's about a third. I would say a third that homeowner's responsible, and probably 2/3 at least that we're responsible. And again, if it's probably, the reality is probably a 50-50 if you know, if you could prove what you know, but,
Right,
you know,
but you can't prove it.
can't, right, exactly.
Okay.
Are there many? I mean, it's not hundreds.
No, there's not hundreds.
Over the course of the year, how
Over the
many?
course of the year, there's, you know, let's say over, what would you say, Mike, on a 12-month basis, probably?
This past year, we've probably had at least a handful,
Yeah.
and the previous 2 years, we have nothing. So
Really?
Yeah.
So you're talking about less than 1%?
Right.
it varies greatly. I mean,
Yeah.
it's that's
Yeah.
nature of the beast.
I think that's a pretty good record.
Yeah.
It's kind of like house fires. You remember the ones that you have because they're that infrequent.
And that's
But
right.
yet, when you have them, they're not pleasant to deal
Right,
with.
Exactly.
And if you look at the numbers, we don't have that many.
Right, exactly. And it's the same thing with failures as well.
Yeah, okay.
Except for the one across the street.
Right, exactly. But you remember them. Yeah.
Okay, any comments from the citizens in the audience tonight? No comments. Oh, that's good. Okay, any other business that anybody wants to discuss at this time?
No, you read my notes? Good thing you have.
You waved it at.
The list is so long.
In addition to the mission
I'm
statement?
under a lot of pressure these days.
Join the group.
No, I've been holding my breath, waiting for the center to get fixed.
We'll keep holding.
What did I do with it?
You put it
You're right, I've got a note here.
on the notes, huh?
I'm so well organized, I can't find anything.
There we go. So what did you want to add to it?
Well, do we need to review the current contract for what we like and don't like, or is that too late?
I think it's a fait accompli. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, it's,
In 3 years, you fix
I
it.
had a question about that, Dan, now that you brought it up, and we have the town council, because Marion, Massachusetts has 500E1 grinder pumps. They run a grinder pump maintenance program, and I was talking with their superintendent, Frank Cooper, this week, and I asked him whether or not in his contract, did he ever run into the issue of prevailing wage? His answer was, no, he never heard it mentioned. Now, for all of our deliberations last year, it never came up until just about the last meeting. Then I started hearing that there could be an issue with the prevailing wage law in Massachusetts. So what I'm wondering is if the attorney or if the town council could explain the prevailing wage law and explain, could it be the case that Marion, Mass is doing things correctly and not having to worry about prevailing wage, and that we're doing things correctly by worrying about prevailing wage? Or is it possible that we might be able not to pay prevailing wage for this particular service?
I can't tell you the last question that you just said, but I do know, and contracts is not really my strong suit, but I do know that typically towns are required to pay prevailing wages. And when we award contracts, we typically need to be aware of that and abide by that prevailing wage law. Now, I did not sit down and look at the specifics of your contract. I've never seen the Marion contract. We don't represent them. But I would be happy if you would like to go back and get somebody from the contracts division at Copeland and Page to discuss that with you. But it's my understanding that most likely Mr. John Giorgio, reviewed the contract, and John is probably as good as it gets in the Commonwealth with respect to contracts, and especially in the sewer realm. So if John's advice to you was that you needed to abide by the prevailing wage, then I think that you can take it to the bank that's good advice.
Thank you.
I think that we were told that it was mandated by the state that we use.
Well, prevailing wage, absolutely, when you're
By the state.
typically
So-
in municipal contracts, typically, there are some minor exceptions which I don't think apply here, because we are actually hiring the people. Sometimes when we have a different arrangement,
The town of Marion is very small. It's a very small town. I mean,
Yes.
I'd say it's probably less than 5,000 people,
They do have 500 grinder pumps.
really.
Yeah,
But it's-
same as we
But
do.
it's just, maybe because it's such a small town, maybe they don't get a waiver?
No exemption.
There's no exemption, okay. all right.
No, there's not.
Okay.
I think it's public funds prevailing wage.
Yeah, okay.
And, that's why I would be surprised
Okay.
if they didn't, but, who knows? There may have been a public-private type partnership wherein they didn't have to, or even perhaps the homeowners themselves
That's possible.
did everything and later gave it to the town, or something to that effect, where I've seen sometimes those kind of relationships, prevailing wages aren't needed to be paid, where the private person ends up undertaking the project and then later giving it to a town.
There's a lot of money in Marion, and Pad Aram is a part of Marion too. That's a very, very nice little area. A lot of very significant yachts down there that I've seen in the harbor.
Well, I should mention that Chelmsford ended up in the spring issue of the Journal of the New England Water Environment Association. Henry Albro, who was here during last year, gave us a presentation on the expenses in Chelmsford, and he wrote that up for a conference, and that was accepted in the spring edition of this journal, and it describes the Chelmsford debate, actually, because it hadn't been resolved at that time, and it also mentions the Marion as an example of a program that was already underway. And if you can believe this, can you read that?
Can you read that?
I can't read it. The print is so small because it got Xerox. What does that number say?
$17.97.
No help here.
If you can believe that, the yearly cost per grinder pump, cost per installed pump in Marion, Mass. per year is $18. And,
To the town, to the
yeah,
users?
that's for the
rest of
service cost per pump.
users? $18?
And for Chelmsford, of course, since there was no program, Henry, what he used was the cost of FR Mahoney, which he also presented to us. And if you remember, it was a pretty low number. And Chelmsford, meantime, and it's also in
Just
this
drive
report.
down the
And it's
street and you'd make that number.
$49. $49 is what he had for the Chelmsford number. But he did not include, because the average age of the Chelmsford pumps is over eight years. This is a young pump population, and if you look very carefully, he would add an extra $100 in order for pump replacement, which would bring it up to $150. At $150, it's a small number. This is just an example of what is possible with a certain program. Now, it may be that they are cutting a few corners someplace, but in Marion, but there is really probably no upper limit to how much money you can spend on a program, because you can gold plate things. So that's why I would really try to emphasize that there should be a cost-benefit analysis. There are many things that are done preventive which actually save money, but there are other expenses sometimes which are additional costs which don't actually save money. And in this particular case, the E1 grinder pump, it's not designed for preventive maintenance. And one of the most common failure mechanisms is the relay just blows out, and you could be there one day and it could blow out the next day. You're not going to detect that there was anything wrong with it in any way. It's more or less a random failure. But I will say that the lifetime of the pump is more something that is conceivably predictable, and replacement of pumps before failure is an area which could save money due to the fact that you're replacing it not on the weekend, which would be a typical failure time due to large water usage. And so that is an area that I think is a reasonable way to save money, but there are certain ways you can spend money and you will not recover. Doing frequent inspections, for example, will not prevent breakdowns, because they will break down more or less randomly. So there does seem to be a cost-benefit analysis on how much you put into it, and putting it into the right area where you can recover, you can actually provide better service and possibly also at a lower cost.
Did you, in speaking to the gentleman from Marion, did you ask him any questions as to, what type of pumps do they have? Who do they have, who's their maintenance contract?
Oh, yeah, they have FR Mahoney. Yeah, they have FR Mahoney.
They have the E1 and they have FR?
They have E1. All their pumps went in around 2005. It's the Series 2000. And they don't have, they're not as, they're a younger population than ours, because they all went in at the same time, and they had a much stricter control on the installations. They didn't have as many installation errors. They do have a better situation than we have, because we had a lot of different people doing installations over the
My
years.
recollection is it's a pretty flat area. There aren't a lot of hills down there. It's right on the coast, so I mean, it's.
Yeah,
Right on the-
certainly.
It's right next to Dartmouth, right?
Yep,
Bit of sand, too.
yep.
Yeah. Dartmouth. well,
Yeah, it's not
Wareham-
because it was hilly at all. It was probably cheaper, is what it, I think, came down to. They were a debate in Marion over the different types, and the cost was lower for the pressure system. And they actually, different sections of towns actually voted, and some sections actually paid more and got gravity, and other sections ended up with the low-pressure system. And they're running their program because it was the Massachusetts funding. They were required to maintain the pumps due to the fact that they accepted government money for the program. So it has differences from our program, but there is still a lot that we can learn from their experience.
So we paid for that, then, huh?
Huh?
We paid for that.
Yeah.
Indirectly. We paid for that. That's interesting, there's such a similarity, the numbers and everything else, so, but I mean, it's a high percentage, but they had an option whether they have low pressure or, I mean, they.
Yeah,
they
different
actually
sections
had
of
an
town, even though they would be structurally or topographically very similar, different sections of town. I think they had some sort of voting system where different regions were done in different manners, and they were priced accordingly. Some people were caught in the block where they got voted in, and they weren't particularly happy about it, but that's just the way they kind of worked it out.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's I'll send this around. It's interesting. It describes it a little bit. I have an electronic copy, and I'll just
Yeah, I'd like
circulate
to
it.
read it, thank you.
Yeah.
That's great,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, send a copy to Mike, too, he'd be interested
Yeah,
in that, too.
yeah. Mike is actually referenced in that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Your favorite?
Royalties, Mike.
I disagreed with his numbers, but
Disagree with his numbers.
I can put my glasses back on.
Okay. I think that probably next meeting, and let's talk about the next meeting because we're running into July. The next 2 weeks would be the 31st. And there aren't 31 days in June, so it would be the 1st of July.
That's right.
Very good.
So I don't know if anybody has any objections to meeting the 1st of July. If you do, let us know and we can reschedule. No problems with the 1st of July?
No, I don't, I think I have another meeting, but
Oh, well, you always have another
I
meeting,
know,
Peggy,
I
but
know,
it's-
I know.
It's probably,
But I'll be
it's
here
probably at a
anyway.
different
But
time.
I'm always here.
You're always here, we know, you're always around, you're always in the town hall sometime. So we can always count on you, right?
That's right.
Okay. All right, so we'll agree to meet on the 1st of July, and at that time, we probably should come up with some concrete recommendations to include in the bylaws. And
We ought to come up with a concrete mission statement.
concrete
We're
mission
going to be
statement.
finishing this, or we won't have a mission statement.
Well, we
Which
have
is
a-
all right with me, I could really
Well,
deal with
we
it.
have a mission statement, we have to just maybe
We
go
just
through
have
it
to
and just
put it down on
agree,
paper.
because it was included in the minutes of the first meeting. But we can go back and we can fine
never
tune
been
it if you
approved.
like, and then we can vote to approve it or disapprove it, or
Okay.
expand upon it.
Okay.
All right? And whatever else we may have at that time, but I think we're reaching a point where we probably ought to be ready to get this thing to a point where we can get it into an amendment and get it to the Board of Selectmen before the end of the summer. So, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your help. Good evening.
Hey, guys.